Good morning, everyone, and welcome to UK Construction Week Online. This is our second virtual event, and it sees us launch UK Construction Week Online, which is our platform for today. This platform will be available now 365 days a year, where we'll be supplying you with content and access to suppliers as well. So whilst we're here, I wanted to sort of introduce you some of the features before we have today's first session. So this first session today is achieving net zero in the built environment and looking at the retrofit challenge. And we've got a great panel today. And if you want to ask questions, and I really would encourage you to ask questions and have a discussion as well whilst this session is on, you can use the live discussion boxes on your screen. Hopefully you can see those. I've put those on your screen as well to show you what they look like. And I would also encourage you to get engaged and talk to our exhibitors as well. This platform is very interactive. You can have a look at the exhibitor profiles. They've got meeting schedule slots for you. You can book in and see people just over the 2 days today, but also you can contact them and network with them going forwards as well. And there are networking rooms as well for you to go off and have a chat in as well on certain topics. So please do make use of those as well. So on to today's first session, and I'm really delighted today that we're looking at net zero in the built environment. And after a flurry of government announcements around net zero and looking at how we get there by 2050, we've had a variety of policies and funding commitments. But what we're looking at today is whether they offer a joined up long-term strategy and will they deliver on our world-leading ambitions. The biggest challenge of all seems to be perhaps retrofit and how we turn millions of houses and public buildings into a net zero building in a relatively short space of time. So to discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined today by my panel, and I'll introduce firstly our chair. So chair today is Jade Lewis. She's Chief Executive of the Sustainable Energy Association. She engages with the development of a range of energy efficient policies and is dedicated to the decarbonisation of homes and buildings. She's joined the SEA with a wealth of experience within policy and regulatory affairs and has a capacity of working with government, parliament and industry at the heart of some of the biggest challenges facing the sector. I'm also joined by Jessica Levy, Director of Communications at the Federation of Master Builders, a member of the FMB's senior management team, and she's been responsible for policy affairs, marketing, digital events and so on. And she's also been leading the development of a national retrofit strategy on behalf of the Construction Leadership Council, bringing together 50 organisations to support long-term integrated plans to green our existing homes. And finally, David Pierpoint, who founded the Retrofit Academy in 2016 and leading the development of the retrofit coordination qualification and established a centre of excellence. Considered one of the UK's leading experts on retrofit education, he's been working with Trustmark, Bayes and the BSI in supporting the transition to deliver whole house retrofit. Welcome to all of you. So thank you very much for joining us today. And Jade, I'm going to hand over to you and I'll come back at the end but there'll be questions, as I say, as we're going through. So please do send those through. So Jade, over to you.
Thank you, Nathan. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jade Lewis, Chief Executive of the Sustainable Energy Association. For those of you who don't know who the SEA is, it's a membership organisation made up of energy suppliers, manufacturers, installers, housing providers and other organisations, all with an expertise in energy and buildings. We're committed to achieving our vision, which is to help create living and working spaces fit for the future generations by ensuring that all buildings are energy efficient, net zero carbon, warm and healthy. Now, the SEA recognises that there's no single solution to decarbonising energy in buildings. A range of technology solutions, financing models and delivery models are required. And in practice, reducing the energy needs of buildings requires a multi-technology solution tailored to the circumstances of the building and its occupants. In other words, a whole house technology neutral approach which starts with the fabric. It's also important, though, that the focus is not solely on carbon when it comes to retrofitting the current housing stock. This has led to unintended consequences in the past. A holistic approach is needed that considers wider health and wellbeing aspects like safety, air quality and thermal comfort. And as Nathan said, we've been inundated with new and updated government policies, schemes and announcements around reaching net zero by 2050 in recent months. This is certainly a preference to the void we've had in previous years following the government's U-turn on zero carbon policy back in 2015. However, we are yet to see the publication of the heat and building strategy, which will hopefully start to join up policy around decarbonising buildings and provide clarity. Our members often tell me that they would love to see more joined up long-term policy around energy and buildings. Industry needs confidence in the direction of travel to invest in the research and development, the capacity, skills and training that are required if we are going to meet the significant challenge of retrofitting the existing building stock and addressing climate change. So now I'll hand over to our first speaker, Jessica Levy from the Federation of Master Builders, to hear her views on the retrofit challenge.
Thanks a lot, Jade, and many thanks to UK Construction Week for including the Federation of Master Builders in your opening session today. I hope everyone is well. So delegates attending this UK Construction Week online event over today and tomorrow will no doubt have noticed a strong theme to our discussions, and I'm really pleased that we're kicking off on that theme today. As the whole sector strives to build back better after the pandemic, it's also really clear that there's a strong intent to build back greener as well, which is good news. So tomorrow you will all hear from colleagues on the Construction Leadership Council introduce Construct Zero, which is a really important programme that will both track and challenge all parts of the built environment to tackle emissions. And as Construct Zero recognises, the UK is not going to be able to meet its legally binding carbon emissions targets if it doesn't address the impact of our homes on the climate. So often in construction, the 90+% of the 90+% of the sector represented by the small and medium-sized businesses tends to get a bit overlooked. The mega projects spark media interest and political attention. And look, let's be honest, that's understandable. I used to work in politics. I definitely get it. But I want to use my 10 or so minutes today to try and focus your attention on your backyards, literal, and for those of us living in flats, hoped for and metaphorical. So why does this matter? We have 28 million leaky homes that are energy inefficient in this country that are in need of retrofitting. 85% of those will still be in use in 2050, which is the point at which the UK has pledged to reach net zero. So over the next few decades, we need to insulate 8 million lofts, we need to tackle 5 million uninsulated cavity walls, 20 million uninsulated floors will need upgrading. For 28 million homes to be retrofitted, we need a plan. In a year when our attention has been focused distressingly on the nation's health, it's important to remember that the retrofit agenda matters much far beyond just the economic, jobs and environmental benefits, all incredibly important and very real that would flow from it. 2.53 million households in this country are living in fuel poverty. And in 2019, 10,000 deaths were linked to the health implications of cold homes. So can we fix it? Of course we can, and we must. But dogged by decades of market failure, retrofit requires a long-term strategy if we're going to give confidence to the industry, but to consumers as well, and to private investors who will play a huge part in funding this, but alongside government. At the FMB, the Federation of Master Builders, we are the largest trade body in the UK construction sector. For the past 80 years, as you can see, we're 80 this year, we've represented the interests of the smallest firms and sole traders in the built environment. And it's our army of local tradespeople who, in the owner-occupied sector at least, will be ideally placed to deliver retrofit. So local builders are in a great position to get retrofit done. That's why we care about it. They are key, we believe, to helping to deliver the government's intentions around a green industrial revolution. Because builders have existing and trusted relationships with homeowners, and they're really well placed to help educate consumers, because that's going to have to be part of this package, about what the energy needs are of their homes as part of larger projects. We know from research that we've done at the FMB and other organisations have also done that homeowners are much more likely to consider some form of energy upgrade as part of a bigger project. So what's holding everything back? We find ourselves in a vicious cycle that a government commitment to a long-term national retrofit strategy could fix. And that's the key thing that I want to try and leave everyone with today. Too few builders are currently have the right skills to deliver the green measures. Support to upskill builders is insufficiently available. Stop-start policies like the Green Homes Grant Scheme, and I'm sure that will come up at some point in questions today, are failing to put the correct incentives in place. There's confusion about standards, technologies to use. Consumers can't find the right tradespeople if they want to make some retrofit improvements to their homes. And the conversation, such that it exists between households, is much more likely to be one of frustration and increasing cynicism rather than excitement about the improvements that can be made. It just seems far too hard, and policy is not going to be successful if it seems hard. So how could we make it easier? Working with the Construction Leadership Council, as Jade and Nathan mentioned at the start, with the support of over 50 built environment and local government organisations, the FMB has developed a national retrofit strategy that can deliver retrofit at scale, the scale that we need it to achieve the UK's transition to net zero. I really hope that in her speech later today, the Construction Minister, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, will recognise that with crucial government backing, we can get this done. An easy way for the government to save almost 85 million tonnes of carbon. If the Minister is looking for one of those today, I can tell her that commitments to a national retrofit strategy, to a long-term delivery plan plotted over 20 years, and with the potential to deliver 500,000 new jobs by its close, is the solution that she should be looking for. It would be a truly transformational infrastructure project, the kind of mega infrastructure project that we know politicians like. But importantly and brilliantly, it will also be delivered locally in every community, in every street, and in every household across the land. So how would it work? Success requires leadership and communication, and that's where the crucial role of government absolutely comes in. We suggest it requires some form of umbrella body to unite diverse local programmes in a coherent whole, but local delivery will definitely be key to this. And we know from various trial pilots going on across the country how well delivery at a local scale can work with proper commitment and leadership and drive behind it. To work, the National Retrofit Strategy requires performance standards and a compliance regime to ensure quality and build that crucial consumer confidence. To create consumer demand, we must give every household a vision of what their home needs and a route and a plan to achieving that, so it doesn't seem quite as daunting. So we advocate the introduction of something that we call a property passport for each home to help with that. And I know David will speak in just a moment about the training and accreditation needs. These inputs, alongside the materials, the equipment, the technology, will all be needed to deliver retrofit. And finally, successful delivery needs money. It needs finance and it needs grants to suit the variety of ownership models that we face in terms of our housing stock in this country. So, as we approach COP26, the government can match its world-beating emissions targets with world-leading commitments to retrofit. I want to end by setting 5 challenges to the government. The government can do this, firstly, by using the upcoming heat and building strategy, which we hope to see very, very soon, to commit to a long-term national retrofit programme. The government can do this, second, by using the spending review this autumn to bring forward the rest of the 9.2 billion that was committed to at the last election to get retrofit off the ground. The work that the FMB has done with the Construction Leadership Council calculates that we need government investment of 5.3 billion to unlock 11.4 billion of private capital and generate GDP growth an extra 12.4 billion, and that's just by the end of this Parliament. So the potential is huge. Thirdly, the government can do this by taking the recommendations of, amongst other organisations, the Cross-Party Environmental Audit Committee, to consider using Brexit freedoms over VAT to set a temporary VAT rate on home improvement works linked to green measures. Fourthly, the government can do this, as David will detail, by taking the skills challenge seriously and recognising that training for retrofit isn't going to happen overnight, so it needs to act soon. And finally, the government can do this by using its unique role to galvanise public understanding and realisation about all of our roles in achieving net zero. The whole of the UK construction sector stands ready to play its part, as I'm sure you will hear from colleagues across construction over the course of today and tomorrow. We really hope that the government is also listening.
Thank you, Jessica. I really hope they're listening too. Some really clear asks for government there that we do need if we're going to commit to this. And it's great to see the industry coming together through the Construction Leadership Council and taking this forward themselves as well. So now over to David Pierpoint from the Retrofit Academy for his views on the Retrofit Challenge.
Thank you, Jade. And Jessica, that's a tough act to follow, I have to say, but I do agree with every word you said. The Retrofit Academy was very pleased to contribute in the early stages of development of that national retrofit strategy, and it's great that the CLC is sort of pushing it hard. It's absolutely what's necessary. Let me start. I am going to focus on retrofit and skills and the people challenges that we face, but I want to start by setting the theme in terms of what is a very crowded policy landscape. There's lots of funding in this space at the minute, lots of things the government is trying to do. But they're all a bit fragmented and bitty, and there is a lack of coherence around it. So we have the challenge, I believe, the legally binding challenge of having a net zero UK by 2048. That can't be achieved without tackling the big elephant in the room of the existing building stock. I think 27%, I believe, of all carbon emissions come from the way in which we heat and power our homes. So the government know that, but it's probably been the area of all of the decarbonisation agenda in which their policies have been least successful. But they are trying, and in fairness, we should give them some credit for that. So I'll just list a few schemes at the moment that are around. You know, there's a £500 million local authority delivery scheme, that's £500 million to be spent this calendar year. There is the introduction of a multi-billion-pound home upgrade grant for the fuel-poor households in rural locations, which has also been brought forward to this financial year. There is the beginnings of a multi-billion-pound social housing decarbonisation plan. Well over £100 million is being spent on that this year. And then there's an existing programme called the Energy Company Obligation, which typically goes under the radar a lot in the construction world, but it's worth typically about £1 billion a year. So all these things are happening, and this is all money the government wants to spend, but we're in this crazy situation where it can't spend it. And this has been demonstrated through the recently scrapped Green Home Grant voucher scheme, which many of you will have heard of. The main reason that has failed is that there simply wasn't the supply chain there to react to a £3 billion investment, a stimulus package that the Chancellor put forward last summer. So the challenge of spending £3 billion between, I think from memory, September and March was an impossible one. And what's happened is I think they've ended up spending only 150 million of that and then scrapping it. So it's not working, and it is because of a lack of supply chain capacity. Anyone who tried to find an installer or a contractor to carry out work for them under the Green Home Grant, as I did, most people experienced extreme frustration in trying to do so. Those of who did manage to find people who were suitably qualified, accredited, and had capacity to take on the work were sometimes let down, I think, by disappointed in the calibre of the company that they were dealing with. Not all, but some. So we've got major skills challenges, major supply chain challenges. My organisation, the Retrofit Academy, has been saying this for years, so we can feel rightly smug, I think, about that. We've been championing this point for the best part of a decade now. We are currently training 1,000 retrofit coordinators. They are people who are suitably qualified and accredited to lead retrofit projects, some of those projects being very large scale ones. We've done that off our own bat. We've recently been the beneficiaries of some government funding, but trust me, in the first 9 years of our existence, we didn't receive any. So there is unfortunately no grand plan and vision for this supply chain challenge that we've got. And it's fallen to organisations like ours to pick up the baton. Unfortunately, we did, but it's not enough. And we know that having 1,000 retrofit coordinators and 28 million homes to retrofit, as Jessica pointed out, isn't where we need to be. We need, there's a government target to get every home in the country to EPC level C by 2030. So forget the decarbonisation challenge, this is just getting homes to a decent point of the staging post. We're going to need somewhere in the region of 400,000 new people in the industry to do that work. Those of you in construction, assuming you're good at what you do, are in demand. You know, there are existing supply chain shortages just to do the kinds of construction we always have done, and the verticals that we always do. So adding in a new vertical like domestic retrofit, there's 27 million retrofits required, is a massive challenge. So 400,000 new people by 2030. And where are we on that? Sadly, we're nowhere. We haven't made a start, and as Jessica said, other than what's coming forward from industry, there doesn't seem to be much of a coherent plan to change that. So the current reality is slightly depressing. If we look at the further education sector, we find further education colleges delivering lots of traditional courses, but really reinforcing the sort of silo mentality around the key trades of plumbing, joinery, plastering, electrical stuff, and so on and so forth, rather than bringing those people together and creating the multi-skilled teams that we need to deliver whole house retrofit. In higher education, the focus on just about every course is on building new stuff, designing new stuff. Very few courses consider retrofit, and even fewer of them look at doing this in innovative new ways, such as applying modern methods of construction and retrofitting homes based on what happens in a factory rather than what happens on site. So we're miles off the pace in FE and HE. We also have the beginning of a professionalisation of the sector, introduced by New British Standard PAS 2035, but the development of those professions in terms of coordinators, designers and assessors, that's still also in its infancy. Now, this PAS 2035 thing is a major change to the industry, and with that comes pain and teething troubles. It doesn't happen overnight. Unfortunately, it's happened, and this is just cruel luck, really. It's happened at a time where the investment that we've been crying out for retrofit for years has suddenly been thrown at it, and hey presto, we're not ready. So we do need a bit more time for that supply chain to mature, but absolutely fundamental to that, and this is very relevant to FNB members, I know, is there must be certainty through policy that the opportunity is there, that if you're going to go through the pain of becoming Trustmark accredited or investing in training, that's going to be worthwhile, that business, and it's going to help them grow. And until we have that consistency of policy, we won't convert these very shrewd individuals. We won't convince them that retrofit is something that they need to do at any sort of scale. So what needs to change? In the short term, whilst we're going through this transition and whilst the government is trying to get these programs moving, there's a need for very substantial short-term investments to grow the capability and capacity of the current industry. It is not perfect, the current industry. Many within it would recognise that fact, but it does need support if it's to be a caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. So we need that, we need it now. We need to take action to address what is a systematic failure of the FE sector and the HE sector to take retrofit seriously. So quite frankly, ministers in the Department for Education need to be telling awarding bodies and telling colleges and universities that their syllabus need to be urgently reviewed, because for every year that we're allowing people to complete their courses without addressing retrofit, we're making the problem and challenge bigger and worse. We also need to challenge the image of this sector. That's true of construction as a whole, I think, and I think somebody needs to pick up that challenge very quickly. We need to attract, as I say, 400,000 new entrants into the construction sector, and we need those people to be of the right sort of calibre and outlook. We particularly got to challenge the image of the construction of the retrofit sector, the energy efficiency sector, because while good people have options in their career, very few are currently looking at that thinking that's where I want to be. You know, it needs to be a sector that's seen as growing and thriving, and can offer people good quality careers, and we're some way away from that at the moment. A lot of these things are outside of my control. I'm glad that the FMB and others are driving policy hard. I can comment on what we as an organisation are planning to do. So just a few quick points to wrap up. The first thing we're planning to do is to scale up what we do. We have been one of the success stories of retrofit education, so we want to do more of it, and we want to do it have more of an impact. So we've recently launched our second new qualification, which is a level 2 award in understanding domestic retrofits, and we also have 1,000 people going through that at the moment, as well as 1,000 retrofit coordinators. So we're going to scale all that up. We're also going to develop some new qualifications, particularly focusing on those PAS 2035 roles of assessor, coordinator, designer, evaluator that are really important to national rollouts. Crucially, we're going to partner with and mentor other providers to help them, support them to start delivering retrofit training, because our mission isn't to become a sort of superpower of retrofit education. It is to enable the whole industry, the whole educational sector to rise to that challenge. So we, from this September, will be working quite closely with a number of colleges and HE institutions to support them to start delivering these qualifications. And finally, we'll be partnering with regional government of all sorts and central government to try and link together that supply and demand, because with the best will in the world, we can train as many people as we like, but if they're not going into jobs, then the investment from government will dry up. So it's very important that there is that linkage between the two. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that's given you a sort of a whistle-stop tour of the skills challenges that we face, which are many and plentiful. Jade.
Thank you, David. And again, really good to see the work that you're doing at the Retrofit Academy to address that gap in the supply chain and that knowledge of whole house, which is so badly needed in the sector to drive those standards forward. We've got some time now for questions and answer session. So please do drop your questions into the discussion page. So firstly, though, a question from me. What do you see are the key barriers to delivering net zero through retrofit? David, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, the biggest one is the one I've just talked about. Really, it's the supply side, it's the capacity issue, and I perhaps haven't touched so much on the capability side of it. So I'll perhaps just comment briefly on that. We have, over the last 10 years, delivered some good retrofit and a depressingly large amount of really bad retrofit. And for evidence of that, I challenge people to drive around the local social housing estate, council house estate, where there'll have been some degree of retrofit done. I drive through one every morning, taking my kids to school, and on a wet day, I can see the problems in those walls with my own eyes getting worse and worse and worse, and you'll see it yourselves. So the solution to that is there aren't many companies out there who set out to do a bad job. It's really about a lack of understanding of how to do that properly, and a lack of alignment between the funding and the companies to enable them to do it properly. Because if we want a good job doing, it's got to be paid for appropriately. And often the kinds of funding that I've talked about haven't funded enough good retrofit. So for me, that's the biggest single barrier. Thank
you. Jessica, do you want to have anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are several, but if I was forced to pick one, I would probably reflect what our members told us recently, given their experience of the Green Homes Grant Scheme. And the words that came up most often in that discussion were continuity and longevity. So if I was forced to pick one, I would say that the biggest barrier is the fact that policy is not consistent in this area. We know that there is market failure, otherwise this would be happening. This is a classic case where there needs to be a degree of intervention to get things started. And the experience to date has been that intervention has always been far too short-lived, particularly for the smallest end of the scale. So the members that we represent are typically 1 to 5 people in a company, if that, very, very small, takes quite quite a leap to sort of have the confidence to move into a different sector. People are thinking about doing that, but they don't make that decision quickly, and they need to sort of have the confidence that there is longevity there. There is, by the time they've made the decision, gone through the training, we're probably talking quite a considerable chunk of months, if not getting on for a year and a bit. And they need to know that what it was that got them interested in the first place is going to be there at the end, that consumer demand is going to build over time. Is it going to happen overnight? Everyone is seemingly talking about it, but are consumers talking about it? Probably not yet. And until there is this sort of longevity, continuity thing, which is why we have been banging on and on for the last couple of months and years before that about the need for a long-term strategy. So yeah, if you help my fix the fire, one thing, long-term commitment from government.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot of the organisations working in this space are SMEs. So what help is there out there for SME building firms? Will they get grants for training? What support is out there for them? What can they do?
So David can probably talk in a bit more detail and with much more authority about the particular grants that are available, but just again, sort of anecdotally, the experience of our members taking the Green Homes Grant Scheme as the sort of most recent foray into this was that they largely found that there weren't the grants available. Our members who decided to go down this route paid for training for their staff, paid approaching and upwards to £10,000 in some cases to get one or two people on their teams trained up for the requisite standards. When they went to local colleges or looked at grants available, they didn't find things that helped them in this area. Now, that could be poor publicity on behalf of sort of training providers, possibly, and a lack of awareness, and more work does need to be done across the whole sector to make people aware of what's available, but there isn't a lot out there. So a lot of the companies who have decided to do this, particularly at the SME end of the scale, they're taking that financial risk on themselves, and that's why that long-term return is so important, because they need to be able to pay that back in years to come.
Yeah. David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I could talk about this one for some time. I'll try and resist the temptation. So first thing to say is there is some stuff out there at the moment, but it has been too low key, and I'm not surprised lots of people haven't found it. And I'll put a link in the chat afterwards to the government website which promotes this. The Green Home Grant had something called the Green Home Grant Skills and Training Competition, which was a £7 million fund to provide training of various types around that were meant to enable the voucher scheme to succeed, which obviously it hasn't. But the skills training competition continues. We've received quite a significant amount of funding through that, and have been able to make funding for the Retrofit Coordinator course, fully funded based on the Retrofit Coordinator course, available. Others have had funding to cover the accreditation costs, which are a major barrier, and I think that you're talking about £10,000, Jessica. I think that's normally for the accreditation costs. So there is some stuff, but it's very patchy. It depends on where you're based, and for some people, I know there was provision for sort of installer training, NVQ type stuff, but it's only available in certain parts of the country. Really, what that says is reinforcing the points that Jessica and I made earlier about we need a nationwide solution to this. And we need a lot of funding released to make this available and affordable nationwide.
Yeah, thanks, David. And a question here about the disruption side of things. So the question says, the EPC documents often suggest floor insulation to achieve a C rating. How can this be achieved when tenants and occupiers with furniture living in situ in the building? So any suggestions for how disruption can be minimised and how we get around that one?
I think that's probably for me, is it? Yeah, I mean, first things first, EPCs telling you what to do is something we counsel against. And we strongly encourage, and it's part of the Retrofit Coordinator's job actually, to question what the outcomes from an EPC assessment is, or any assessment using RDSAP software. When we're involved in delivering retrofit projects, we go into much more detail than that to properly understand the needs of the building. So just because that software spitting out under floor insulation as being the first thing, it rarely is the first thing, particularly if there are lower hanging fruits such as just cavities or loss to do. Nonetheless, it's a very valid form of insulation, and the issue of disruption is a very real one. There is a specific innovation called QBot, which is essentially about putting robots under floorboards, suspended timber floors, and applying insulation in a relatively low hassle, disruption-free way. Certainly residents don't need to decant. There may also, I have to do a bit of a BBC here, there may be other solutions available. That's the only one I know about. And it's the only one that we've reviewed and understood properly from the Retrofit Academist side. So that might be something that individual, I'll put a link to QBot in the chat.
That's great, thank you. Another question.
If I can, just on that one, I mean, it's not the specifics. I definitely can't speak to the specifics, and would always defer to David on that, but just a couple of sort of general points around that. I think the question points to something that is important for all of us to grasp, and this is where I think the role of government in communications is important, that this is not going to be a disruption-free experience, and whether it's retrofitting our homes or making other lifestyle changes and decisions that we will be nudged to or regulated to do over the course of the next couple of decades, there's a bit of a reckoning that if we want to tackle climate change, we're going to have to accept some changes to our lives. And I think that's part of the important communications piece that needs to be done and needs to ultimately be led centrally, to explain to all of us the realities of the changes that we will need to be made. The other just sort of generic point around disruption is that would be another reason to sort of ensure that you have quality tradespeople doing the work, who take customer service incredibly seriously, who are trained to ensure as minimal amount of disruption and hassle as possible. But all building work is going to involve a bit of hassle. I think it's about just trying to use the technologies and the reputable tradespeople to ensure that hassle is minimised. Yeah,
I agree strongly with that. You're absolutely right. There is another side to this, which is about treating homeowners as customers rather than grant holders or inconvenience. So there's a big culture change needed around that, I think. And we typically, the energy efficiency sector hasn't done that very well. So I think that's another barrier actually that we need to overcome.
Speaking of consumers, that side of it's come up quite a bit in earlier on. What do you think can be done to engage the general public in this? Do they need sticks to push them? Will incentives work? What do you think some of the answers might be to get people to want to do this and create that demand for people carrying out energy efficiency retrofits?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Neither Jessica or I said that demand was a major barrier, and I don't believe that it is at all. Relative to the supply chain challenge, it's you know, there are plenty of homeowners who want to improve their homes. I do, and I don't know where to go to. And I run the National Centre of Excellence for Retrofit, so the general public have an even bigger problem there. So, you know, I think there's plenty of demand. I mean, it may not be top of everyone's wish list. New kitchens and bathrooms tend to dominate those, but there's enough demand at the minute to stimulate a significant market.
Can I offer three possible solutions? So I mentioned VAT stimulus, VAT cuts. We know that is proven to have benefits, so would definitely just want to reiterate that as a bit of a nudge if it's felt that that's needed. I think regulation is going to have to play a role as well, whether or not that sort of changes at point of sale of a property, and requiring certain sort of, whether it's EPC or the ratings to be reached. I think information is key, so that idea of a property passport, people having that control and that empowerment to understand what's going on in the property that they currently live in and what the steps are to get to the point where that property is no longer contributing negatively to emissions. This can be an expensive expensive journey, and I think people having this idea of what measures taking the view of the whole house, which is of course incredibly important, are possible, enables people to make steps along that journey if they're not able to do it all at once. And again, just coming back to comms, but I would say that, but I think it is really important. I do genuinely think that government and institutions and people need to start talking about this. I think there is definitely an awareness and a demand in the able to pay part of the market, but only in a bit of the able to pay part of the market. I would challenge there. And I think we just need to make this a bit more normal. People compare it to electric vehicles. So it's a behavior change over time. And part of that is your friends talking about it, going to the pub and hearing people talk about it. We need to begin to normalise that. So we need to help facilitate that conversation.
Yeah, agree, Jessica. People think nothing of changing their double glazing for energy efficiency reasons, but it's not quite the norm with the rest of the fabric and elsewhere in the building. There's a question here. Is there anything the social housing sector can do to support upskilling of workers for decarbonisation?
Maybe. The answer is yes. We work with lots of social landlords. We're training lots of people who work for social landlords. There is, as I mentioned earlier, a social housing decarbonisation fund, which is relatively small at the minute, sort of in innovation pilot stage at the moment, but they're spending £50 million this year. Another 50 million is being allocated this year, and then my understanding is that's building into a £1 billion a year scheme over the next few years. So, there's going to be a lot of activity in social housing and retrofit over the next 4 or 5 years. And it's very important that social landlords have a good understanding as whether they have a labour force to do the work themselves or they're managing contractors to do it. They need to be really good, intelligent clients. They also need to sort of lead the market, I think. So we're talking about demand. If a lot of that demand is initially going to come from social landlords, and I'd hazard a guess that I think there are 4 million social homes in the UK, I would imagine they'd be amongst the first 10 million deep retrofits to be done, full stop, would be my guess. So they've got an opportunity to lead the way, and there's a lot of social value locally that can come off the back of that volume of work. So I think that's their key role.
Yeah, absolutely. Social housing providers leading the way would be great. Jessica, did you want to add?
I think that absolutely is happening. So a lot of those pilots that both David and I have mentioned, where retrofit is happening at a local level, are being driven by forward-thinking, engaging, innovative local authorities or regional governments where that's happening. It's interesting to note, sort of obviously we're in election period, but various moralities talking about their sort of energy plans for their area. And on the housing association side, that thought leadership piece and that educating everyone piece. I know that the National Housing Federation as the trade body for housing associations is definitely taking the retrofit agenda incredibly seriously. So I think having that leadership through bodies like that is definitely important to help all of those on the ground contribute, because we all need to be part of this. It's massive. Everyone needs to get involved.
Huge. Fully agree there, Jessica. Question here, a company who were going to invest in training but were put off by uncertainty over the Green Homes grants. What confidence should we have now? How can we prepare and how can we lobby to reinstall the scheme? So lack of confidence there because of chopping and changing. Any suggestions?
Yes, I hear you. Hope that something will come in the spending review. Absolutely, you can lobby, talk to your MP if you can, get involved via social media. I'm not quite sure what sort of organisation the questionnaire is part of, but if you've got a trade body, get in touch with them, because I'm sure they will be lobbying. The damage to confidence from the scrapping of the Green Homes Grant Scheme, it was on the one hand so predictable that it was going to happen because of elements of how that scheme was created in the first place, but nonetheless still incredibly dispiriting when it did happen, because it set confidence back, and the scars of the Green Deal are still felt, particularly in the smaller side of the construction sector. and it takes a lot to try and, you know, march people up to the top of the hill again. And it's kind of rational that small business people are not wanting to make those risky decisions. And then you have people like David and myself sort of saying, oh, but you should do, but also understanding entirely why it's rational that people don't want to. So we absolutely need the signal from government sense. They've got a heat and building strategy opportunity, they've got spending review opportunity, they've got COP. I mean, there are so many opportunities. Just do whatever you can to keep talking about it.
I have to say as well, the conversations we were having with government when they did close a Green Homes grant was that they didn't want to sort of knock the confidence of the sector. They know that they've taken another scheme away, but they have rediverted the funds to public sector scheme and social housing schemes. So I think, you know, looking locally, that's where the money's now going, and getting involved in social housing, in local authority work is where there can be some confidence going forward. So I think we will see a lot.
There can, Jay. Sorry to talk over you, but just this is a really important point that I'm really keen to use this platform to make, because I'm glad the opportunity has arisen. I think, yeah, the diversion to these social housing side of things is really important. Like we have to do this to all of our homes. So it's great that it's happening. And to an extent, it makes a lot of sense to happen at social housing level because of mass ownership. It's much easier to manage that than owner occupied. However, I really just want to dispel this assumption that some make that the SMEs that would have got involved in the Green Homes Grant Scheme will just switch over and do the local authority scheme, because they're not the same type of SMEs. I think we risk, and unfortunately politicians and officials seem to do this as well too often, risk sort of just assuming all SMEs are the same. And they really aren't. The sorts of SMEs that the FMB as an organisation represents, like I said, they're very small. They are not contractors in the same way that a small company who might work for a local authority might be. The approach to work is different. The hours are different. The attitude is different. Quite often the quality is different as well. And it's not just an easy kind of, well, here's another pot, you can just diversify your business into that and start becoming a contractor for a local authority. So just, yeah, sorry, that was my little...
No, it's actually, and this is why we...
soapbox bit, but I think just really important to see that there's still a massive chunk of the industry that is not going to be supported if we don't kind of reinstate something that looks a bit like a Green Home Grant.
Really stresses the need, Jessica, for long-term joined-up thinking on this, so everyone's got their clarity and confidence going forward. We're about to wrap up now. David, Jessica, any final little point you want to leave everyone with?
Well, I'm just going to finish with a comment on that last question, if I may. Again, I agree with Jessica, and I've worked with the FMB for many years, worked with its membership for many years. They're amongst the shrewdest. They tend to be men, the ones I've dealt with. I'm sure there are some great ladies there too. You know, they are shrewd. You know, and they're very busy. And so you know, convincing, you know, this gentleman saying he's uncertainty over the Green Home Grant, not confidence, and so on and so forth, is partly the case. And then we've got this that, you know, they actually don't need this work in order to be successful, happy, and profitable. So there is a big challenge there. One of my proudest moments in the history of the Retrofit Academy was actually with an FMB member who, after doing our course, I mean, this gentleman was never going to become a retrofit coordinator. He ran his own successful construction firm, but he said to me, David, your course has made me a better builder. And that to me was the most important thing. And he's put a lot of that stuff into his everyday practice, and that's very valuable, I think. So there you go.
It must be a nice accolade for you there, David. And Jessica, final point.
Long-term plan. Government needs to commit this year to a long-term plan that works for the whole of the industry, down to the smallest sole trader.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thanks, David. Thanks, Jessica, for some great discussion today. And I'll bring this to a close now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jade. Thank you, David and Jessica. That was really good. A great way to start our 2 days of content. Lots of things to think about, lots of lobbying to do, so and lots of work to do. So thank you very much. It was a great start to the 2 days. I just want to bring people's attention to our next session, which is at 10:30, which is Richard Harrell from CABE looking at the building safety bill. And then at 11:15, we've got Build Back Better, with some of the key stakeholders in the sector, and some of the issues we've talked about in that, I'm sure, will come up again as we talk about that at 11:15. So hopefully we see everyone back there. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay.